21 people died after eating candy. Most of them were children, and no one was convicted of murder. Not because of corruption, not because evidence disappeared, not because witnesses were silenced or paid off, but because what happened wasn't illegal. In October 1858, in the industrial city of Bradford, England, something impossible occurred. A mass poisoning that killed 21 people in less than a week. Where investigators knew exactly what happened. Where they could trace every step from source to victim. Where the poison was identified in laboratory analysis. Where those responsible were known and charged. And yet, no crime had been committed because the laws didn't exist. This is the story of the Bradford poisoning, how it happened, why no one could be held accountable, what it reveals about the systems we trust today. Because the people in 1858 thought their system was fine too. Right up until children started dying. October 30th, 1858. A Saturday evening in northern England. Bradford was an industrial city built on textile mills and coal. Factory chimneys rose above rows of workers' housing. Smoke hung in the air from morning until night. Most families lived paycheck to paycheck. Entertainment was expensive. But there was one small luxury that children could afford. Peppermint candy from street vendors. White lozenges shaped like buttons. Sweet, cooling, pleasant. A few pennies bought a handful. On this particular Saturday night, a vendor in Bradford's market district sold his usual batch. The candy had been made that morning in a local confectioner's workshop, come mixed according to the standard recipe, shaped by hand, delivered to vendors across the city. Dozens of children bought the candy that evening, ate it on their way home, shared it with siblings. By Sunday morning, something was wrong. A child in the East End of Bradford woke up violently ill. Vomiting that wouldn't stop. Stomach pain intense enough to cause screaming. But across the city, in a completely different neighborhood, another child was experiencing the same symptoms. And another. And another. By Monday morning, 2 children were dead. By Tuesday, 4. By Wednesday, 7 people had died. Different streets across Bradford. Different families with no connection, no obvious pattern. Until a physician started asking detailed questions. He reviewed his notes from the cases he'd treated, compared them with reports from other medical practitioners, and he found it. Every single victim, without exception, had eaten peppermint candy from the same street vendor. The same batch sold on Saturday night. The physician moved quickly. He collected samples of the remaining candy, sealed them carefully, sent them to a laboratory in Leeds, marked urgent. The chemist who received the samples was one of Britain's leading experts in toxicology. The analysis began on Wednesday evening. First, visual examination. White lozenges, slightly irregular in shape. Nothing unusual to the eye. Then chemical testing, dissolving samples in water, heating them, adding reagents that would react to known poisons. The results came back positive. It was arsenic. Arsenic trioxide specifically. One of the most toxic substances known to Victorian science. And it wasn't trace amounts. 12 pounds of arsenic trioxide had been mixed directly into the candy batch. To understand how deadly that is, consider this. A lethal dose of arsenic for an adult is roughly 100 milligrams, about the weight of 2 grains of rice. For a child, it takes even less. 12 pounds equals roughly 5.5 million milligrams, enough to kill tens of thousands of people. And it had been sold as candy to children. But here's where the investigation took an unexpected turn. When authorities traced the candy back to the confectioner's workshop, they found something strange. The confectioner was devastated, genuinely shocked. He had no idea what had happened. He explained his process. The same recipe he'd used for years. Peppermint oil for flavor, sugar for sweetness, and a white powder filler to bulk out the mixture and reduce costs. Using fillers was standard practice across the entire food industry. Everyone did it, and it was completely legal. The filler he used was called Daft, a substance made from calcium sulfate. Harmless, tasteless, cheap. He had sent someone to a pharmacy to purchase it. The pharmacy worker had gone to the storage room in the back, a dim space with stone walls and wooden shelves. Multiple barrels arranged on the floor, all containing white powder, all looking identical, and critically, none of them labeled. The worker grabbed what he believed was the Daft barrel, handed it over to the confectioner's assistant. Payment was made, receipt was signed, everything documented, everything seemingly normal. The confectioner took the barrel back to his workshop, measured out 12 pounds, mixed it thoroughly into his candy recipe, shaped the lozenges by hand, packaged them, delivered them to street vendors across Bradford. But that barrel hadn't contained Daft. And here's the terrifying part. There was no way anyone could have known. Arsenic trioxide has no smell to warn you, no distinct color to identify it, no taste that would make you immediately spit it out. It looks exactly like dozens of other white powders used in Victorian industry. And no one tested it before use, because testing wasn't required, because verification wasn't standard practice, because the regulatory framework that would require such precautions didn't exist. By the time the laboratory confirmed what was in the candy, the 21 people were already dead. Authorities now faced an unprecedented question. They knew what happened. They knew who was involved. They could trace every step of the chain. The evidence was overwhelming. The community was demanding justice. But how do you prosecute someone for breaking a law that doesn't exist? The case went to trial. The confectioner was charged. The pharmacy owner was charged. The courtroom was packed. Families of the victims attended every session. The trial became a national sensation. The prosecution laid out the facts. 12 pounds of arsenic mixed into candy. 21 deaths directly attributable to that candy. A clear chain of custody from source to victim. The evidence was irrefutable. But the defense had a devastating argument. Show us the law that was violated. Yoba point to the regulation that was ignored. Produce the statute that was broken. And the prosecution couldn't, because there were no food safety laws in Britain in 1858. No regulations governing food production. No requirements for ingredient testing. No mandates for proper labeling. No government oversight of food purity. The confectioner had followed standard industry practice. The pharmacy sold a substance without labeling it. But there was no law requiring labels. Every step of the process was legal. Every decision was within accepted business norms. After days of deliberation, the jury returned their verdict. Manslaughter, not murder, because there was no intent to kill, just negligence. And here's what that verdict revealed. It was the first time a British court formally acknowledged something revolutionary. That the absence of regulation is itself a form of systemic harm. That society has a responsibility to establish protections even if businesses haven't asked for them. But the verdict didn't bring back the 21 people who died. It didn't fix the underlying system, because the system still didn't exist. And here's what made the Bradford poisoning explode into a national crisis. This wasn't an isolated incident. Investigators began looking more closely at Victorian food production. What they found was systematic adulteration across the entire industry. Bread was routinely bulked with chalk dust and ground bone, whitened with alum, a chemical that caused intestinal damage. Milk was watered down to increase volume, then thickened with plaster to hide the dilution. Tea was mixed with dried leaves collected from hedgerows, or used tea leaves were dried, colored, and resold as new. Candy was bulked with whatever white powder was cheapest that week. Sometimes harmless daft, sometimes lead compounds, sometimes arsenic, purchased in bulk because it was inexpensive. And none of it was hidden. It was normal, because there was no legal requirement to disclose ingredients. No regulation mandating safety testing. No government agency with authority to inspect facilities. The market was supposed to regulate itself. Competition was supposed to weed out dangerous practices. Transparency was expensive and therefore optional. Testing was an unnecessary cost. The Bradford poisoning revealed a truth the public hadn't wanted to face. Every loaf of bread could contain poison. Every glass of milk could be adulterated. Every piece of candy could kill. And consumers had no way to know. No ingredient labels to read. No regulatory stamps to verify. No way to distinguish safe products from dangerous ones. They simply had to hope that businesses would voluntarily choose safety over profit. And the evidence showed that hope was misplaced. Public outrage was immediate and sustained. Families demanded government action, newspapers ran investigations, medical professionals testified about the dangers. For 2 years, pressure built, until 1860. Inside the British Parliament building, lawmakers passed the Adulteration of Food and Drink Act, the first comprehensive food safety law in British history. It required manufacturers to list ingredients on packaging. It mandated the separation of poisons from food substances in storage. It created government inspection authority. It established criminal penalties for those who sold adulterated food. The law wasn't perfect, but it established a principle that would spread across the entire world. France adopted similar regulations within 3 years. Germany followed with its own food safety laws. The United States created the Pure Food and Drug Act in 1906. For the first time in human history, law established clearly that you cannot sell poison as food. You cannot prioritize profit over safety. You cannot hide dangerous ingredients from consumers. And it took 21 preventable deaths to establish that principle. But here's the question we should be asking. That system in 1858 looked completely normal to the people living in it. No one thought it was broken. Businesses operated within accepted practices. The system looked fine, until it killed 21 people. So here's the uncomfortable question. How do we know our system isn't broken right now? We have regulations today, extensive ones. Ingredient lists are printed on every package. Government inspection facilities operate with sophisticated equipment. The regulatory framework is stronger than anything Victorian England could have imagined. But here's what we don't talk about enough. Regulation only works if it's enforced. And enforcement only works if it's funded. In many jurisdictions, food safety budgets are periodically reviewed and adjusted. Inspection staff levels fluctuate. Laboratory testing capacity changes. When enforcement capacity decreases, the risk of violations can increase. Contamination scandals still occur in modern facilities. Mislabeling still happens. Dangerous shortcuts still get taken. Not because the laws don't exist, because enforcement operates within resource constraints. And here's what history teaches us. Every food safety law exists because someone died first. Every inspection protocol emerged from a failure. Every safety standard was written in response to documented harm. 21 people died in Bradford because no one labeled a barrel in a storage room. Because no one thought verification was their responsibility. Because profit margins mattered more than safety protocols. The law didn't protect them. Because there was no system. It took their deaths to build one. So here's the question. If it took 21 deaths to create food safety laws in 1858, how much enforcement would need to disappear before we're back where we started? How many inspections would need to be skipped before dangerous practices go undetected? How far would enforcement capacity need to decline before the regulatory framework becomes meaningless? Before the system looks normal, right up until it fails. Before we learn again that markets don't regulate themselves. The Bradford poisoning happened because there was no system. The question is, how much of our system can we afford to lose before we're functionally back there?